All right, this video is about my paper, A Horizon Defined by Myths, revealing Krishna as the unknown god behind Plato's Republic and Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. This is the first in, this is going to be a series of three papers, and I'm here with my friend James Moran. If I call him Jamie, that's because that's what I called him when we were much younger. We grew up together in Bethesda, Maryland. And I brought Jamie on board to help explain, not only just to discuss the philosophical issues here, but also to put it in an astrological perspective, because this paper is being released on February 20th, 2026, when Saturn and Neptune are conjunct at 0 point Aries, which I've read a lot of articles about online, this great reset, this important historical period. And the reason I wanted to bring Jamie on board, James Moran, is that in 1989, the previous conjunct of Saturn and Neptune occurred while I first read Plato's Republic. So this paper is really the conclusion of, or the culmination of this, what is it, 36-year period, or even more, 37, since 1989, since the previous conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. We're back to another conjunction as this diachronic unfolding of this astrological archetypal alignments, and we're on the school of Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche, astrologically speaking. It's a Platonic-Jungian tradition. So with that, Jamie, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah. I'm an archetypal astrologer and here to just revel in Todd's fascinating theories and look at the archetypal correlations with the astrological transits, um, as principally Saturn, Neptune, maybe some other ones. And yeah, I'm just here to kind of enjoy the theories that will unfold in this introduction, Todd giving an introduction to his paper, and then also give my angle on the astrological component because that's my professional practice.
All right, yeah. So Jamie calls me Todd because that's what I go by. Timothy Owen Desmond's my legal name. It's kind of my pen name is my actual legal name, but I go by Todd. So I'm going to summarize this paper a little bit. And Jamie, if you feel like jumping in at any time, you can. And
Sure.
then after I just summarize all the basic ingredients, then I'm going to go look at the horoscope for, we're recording this on the 19th, but this is going to be released on the 20th when the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is 0.0 exact. And it's at 0.44 at the 0 degrees Aries. All right, so here is the paper. Solutions to the riddles in the Republic and the birth of tragedy. So the main riddle, here I'll just, in case people want to read this at some point when they freeze the screen or whatever, the main riddle I have is that the surface reading of the Republic is patterned on the Bacchae, Euripides' tragic play, the Bacchae, his last trilogy, and this was one of them, the Bacchae. It won him first prize posthumously. He died before it was performed in 405 BC. It won that competition, the Dionysia, the religious festivals for the god Dionysus. So on the surface of the Republic, Plato depicts Socrates evicting Dionysian tragedies and comedies from the ideally just society, because the stories about the lying and deceptive gods doing horrific things to each other and to humans is not a good role model for educating the people in a just society. So the comic contradiction is that it's a point-for-point plot parallel with Euripides' play featuring Dionysus returning from Asia to Greece with his dancing chorus of Asian Bacchae to initiate the blasphemous town of Thebes, his hometown where he was born. He was immediately swept off to the east for tragic reasons having to do with the demigoddess Hera. But he came to initiate Thebes and ultimately to have the king of Thebes, King Pentheus, murdered by the women of his city, led by his own mother and aunts. His mother was Agave. So this is this tragic play where he gets ripped to pieces in the end. And to cut to the chase, the big ending that is not included in the Republic, but that the reader must infer, is the murder of Polemarchus in the Piraeus where this dialogue is taking place. So I'm going to go over just the basic parallels between these two literary masterpieces. And then I'll talk about how Nietzsche interpreted it and which really links it to Krishna. So in the Republic, it begins with Socrates getting arrested by this young oligarch Polemarchus in the port town of the Piraeus, which was attached to Athens. In the beginning of the Bacchae, Dionysus returns to Greece. He says, "Here I stand, a god incognito," and King Pentheus has him arrested. So in the beginning of both works, Socrates is arrested by Polemarchus, Dionysus is arrested by King Pentheus. Then in the middle of the Bacchae, Dionysus escapes. He creates an earthquake and a lightning storm, destroys the palace beneath which he was imprisoned in the horse stables under the palace. And then King Pentheus threatens him with rearrest. In the middle of the Republic, in the beginning of Book 5, Socrates escaped from the initial argument about absolute justice. He thought he had escaped, and then Polemarchus tugged on another person's Adimantas's cloak and was whispering in his ear, and Socrates says, "What are you talking about?" And he threatened him with rearrest, just like in the Bacchae. Then in the Bacchae, Dionysus shows King Pentheus the image of two suns and two cities of Thebes. King Pentheus is in a kind of a state of madness, and he sees Dionysus and he sees two suns and two cities of Thebes, which I am saying Plato paralleled with the famous cave allegory, which says that the material world radiating from the sun is like a reflection or a shadow projection of the eternal spiritual world of eternal forms radiating from the idea of the good, which is the archetype of the sun, the supreme source of everything, the idea of the good. So then, in the end of the Bacchae, Dionysus lures King Pentheus out to Mount Cithaeron. He puts him on top of a giant fir tree to overlook what he believes will be a naked orgy among the Maenads, the mad women of Thebes. Instead, Dionysus then, who has disguised himself as the priest of his own religion, he says to the Maenads, "Behold, here's your enemy. Kill him." So they rip the tree up with superhuman strength from its roots, and they rip the king up to pieces. So in the Republic, it ends with the myth of Ur, a near-death experience of a soldier named Ur. He found his disembodied Psyche out at the horizon of the cosmos. He saw the three fates, the singing sister goddesses representing past, present, and future there, and they were handling each reincarnating Psyche's thread of destiny. That has something to do with the parallel with string theory that we're going to get to. But the inferred ending of the Republic is the murder of Polemarchus in the Piraeus in 404 BC, decades before Plato wrote the Republic, by the 30 tyrants who usurped the Athenian democracy, and they were backed by Sparta. And this was in the immediate aftermath of Athens' final loss to Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. Alan Bloom, in his translation of the Republic, which is right here, in one of the endnotes, he describes this whole scene. So that's the final parallel with the Bacchae. Polemarchus was murdered in that place where this entire dialogue is taking place. And the leader of the 30 tyrants was a man named Critias, who was formerly one of Socrates' students, and Socrates was subsequently executed for corrupting the youth and believing in gods of his own invention instead of the gods recognized by the state. And that corrupting the youth charge was related to the suspicion that he had corrupted Critias, thus leading to the murder of Polemarchus. So those are the basic plot parallels between the Republic and the Bacchae, and it inverts the surface meaning of the Republic. So Jamie, I've talked to you about this over the past couple of years. You just read the summary of this. So do you have any comments for that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. The parallel is it's rich, it's fascinating, and it it's got yeah, kind of the implications are pretty impactful in the sense that the reading of the Republic is actually the opposite in a sense of what the surface reading is. There's also a very Plutonic, like from the archetypal perspective, there's a very Plutonic thread there in the
Right.
sense that Dionysus is associated with Pluto and the reason for the Dionysian plays, I mean the plays of Euripides to be exiled from the ideal cities because they have this kind of it's very Plutonic. It's, Pluto's associated with that which is rejected and that which is destructive, and so there's kind of like this rejection of that. Anyways, yeah, no, I'm just really enjoying your very succinct just description of these parallels. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so now I'll quickly just say my interpretation of what Friedrich Nietzsche thought about this parallel. I believe in his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, he leaves clues indicating he knew about this parallel and he relates it to Krishna. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about this alignment right here. That's Saturn, that's Neptune, this is 0 point Aries, and how what we're going over is embodied by this archetype. So in The Birth of Tragedy, Friedrich Nietzsche is a theist. He's an atheist in later books, but he's presenting himself as a theist in his first book, which was published in January of 1872, and he blames Socrates for killing tragic culture, Dionysian tragic culture, which he said brought myth back to life in Athens in the 5th century BC, especially with Aeschylus and Sophocles, but he blames Socrates for killing tragic culture by corrupting Euripides, and that Euripides' plays emphasized scientific logical dialogue over the choral music. And the music is what brought the archetype, the idea of the god, to life in the audience. So he's using a Platonic framework in The Birth of Tragedy. Friedrich Nietzsche is. So he blames Socrates for killing Dionysian tragic culture, but he secretly alludes to this plot parallel between the Republic and the Bacchae, which inverts the whole attack, the Socratic scientific attack on Dionysus. And in section 15, he says the intention, the goal of science was always that when it reaches its limits, the limits of space and time, it will recoil back into the tragic myth from which it was born, the tragic myth that it destroyed. And I'm saying that occurred in 1965 when Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking finally got the mainstream physicists to acknowledge the reality of gravitational singularities in black holes and at the Big Bang. That same year, 1965, the founder of the Hare Krishnas, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, it's actually the Gaudiya Vaishnava school of Vedanta, the 16th century school of Vedanta founded by Chaitanya, the musical dancing and singing and chanting of the names of Krishna, the flute-playing dancing god. Nietzsche, in The Birth of Tragedy, in section 18, he equates tragic culture with Indian Brahmanic culture. It's strange and unexpected. In section 20, he says, when science reaches its end and the age of Socrates dies, you shall accompany the Dionysian pageant from India to Greece. Believe in the miracles of your God, be ready for a lot of strife. But from India to Greece, he places Dionysus in India. In the attempt at a self-criticism, which is the preface Nietzsche added to The Birth of Tragedy in 1886, 14 years after he published it, he admits the book is beriddled. Dionysus is a mask for some unknown god, some still unknown god. He calls that still unknown god the Antichrist in section 5, but then in section 7, he calls that unknown god the old god, to worship whom leaves you metaphysically consoled as Christians. And I go through all the riddles, and I'm saying the implication is that Nietzsche believed in theories of the day that the tragic birth story of Christ is based on the tragic birth story of Krishna. And Nietzsche believed Plato and Jesus were both secretly devotees of Krishna. And he was trying to bring Western society full circle back to that by solving riddles in his books. His later atheistic anti-Christian books, I argue he was playing the role of the Buddha of Europe. He says I could be the Buddha of Europe, but he meant, I believe, the Hindu version of Buddha as a Vishnu avatar, one of Krishna's Vishnu avatars disguised as an atheist, ultimately to bring the history of Western philosophy away from Krishna as veiled in Plato's dialogues and the Bible back around to a revelation of Krishna. So that's in a nutshell. Oh yeah, the last piece is that holographic string theory. After 1965, string theory investigated black holes and came up with this, and this is the prevailing theory among theoretical physicists today, The past, the present, and the future are conserved at each point of the encompassing horizon of the cosmos, the spherical border, where from our geocentric perspective, space-time is expanding away at the speed of light. It's projected in from there on these fundamental elastic strings of energy to create the cinematic hologram, Leonard Susskind calls it, the originator of this version of string theory. And we live in a holographic movie, says Brian Greene, the famous string theorist. One last anecdotal note, Brian Greene, I discovered, who compares string theory to Plato's cave allegory repeatedly. His brother, Joshua Greene, was one of Prabhupada's original disciples, and he wrote a biography about Prabhupada, Swami in a Strange Land, How Krishna Came to the West. That subtitle, something like that. All right, so there's the book. The big challenge is putting all of those pieces together to show how we are at this historical phase where the riddles of Plato's Republic and Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy are being solved. I claim to be providing the solutions. It points to Krishna, and it shows how this Hare Krishna movement was predicted all along.
So
In
can I give a
Plato's,
recap and see if it's accurate?
yes, please do.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying Nietzsche was pointing out is that he was saying that the ultimate that there's kind of like a an arc or a return of science that it through the rational mind goes until its limit and and then at its limit space and time break down and then it returns to the Dionysian tragic the way that he describes Euripides plays, which is more kind of like the surrender to to the tragic, to the Dionysian, the kind of like larger uh, something that is not of the rational mind, something that is mysterious and kind of destructive and recreative and so it's going back and then the actual manifestation of that in science is the discovery of black holes and how time and space break down there. Um, and the kind of the rational mind cannot go, like it can't go there. Um, and so the surface reading of the surface reading of the Republic kind of can't go there. This kind of like surface reading of like the ideal city is based on the rational mind. Um, is actually there's an undercurrent there that there's actually a projection that that it's cyclical, that the ideal city and the rational mind kind of evolves or devolves, you could say, back into the Dionysian. Does that sound right?
Yeah, yeah, that's what he's saying. I'm going to go actually to this paper and just in the synopsis. The language he uses the language that is easily applicable to black holes when he's talking about when science reaches its well, here's this great quote from Brian Greene. 2 millennia later, it seems that Plato's cave may be more than a metaphor to turn a suggestion on its head. Reality, not its mere shadow, may take place on a distant boundary surface, while everything we witness in the three common spatial dimensions is a projection of that faraway unfolding reality that is maybe akin to a hologram or really a holographic movie. He's saying it inverts Plato's cave because in Plato's cave allegory, the two-dimensional flat back wall of the cave where the shadows are is the
Hmm.
shadow, and the three-dimensional puppets behind the prisoners that cast the shadows are closer to reality, whereas in string theory, it's the two-dimensional spherical surface of the universe that projects in the illusion of three-dimensional forms, us.
Hmm.
It doesn't really invert Plato's cave allegory, and if you look at other dialogues like the Phaedrus and the Timaeus and the myth of Earth, the end of the Republic, he very clearly places all of the absolute ideas out at this outermost sphere, the mother substance, he calls it in the Timaeus. And those absolute ideas, the archetypes of the collective unconscious that Jung talks about, they project our material world in from that outermost sphere. That is Platonic cosmology, that is also in the Vedanta cosmology, especially in the Bhagavad Purana, which is a big issue of this book. How old is the Bhagavad Purana? 19th century philologists said it was probably after Christ, maybe as late as the 12th century. The Bhagavad Purana itself says it's 5,000 years old. I believe that's what Nietzsche believed. All right, but the
Funny because the name Bhagavad Purana means, Purana means old. So it's self-declaring itself as the old text.
exactly, and that is what these philologists were saying. They're saying the Brahmins, however late it was, after Christ most likely created it and then backdated it to give it Vedic authority as a way to continuously combat Buddhism. And
Mhm.
then one philologist, Albert Weber, thought also to combat Christianity, and therefore it incorporated the stories of Christ, like the tragic birth story of Christ.
Mhm.
They said, yeah, Krishna's an older legend, but the story of his birth is after Christ, and they imitated Christ. So that's a big issue. And scholars ridicule Nietzsche for believing that the Vedic philosophy is at least 4,000 years old. So that's a part of it. But here is that what you were talking about. Here's what Nietzsche says. This is his language. So I would say, by studying black hole, string theorists unwittingly completed Nietzsche's prophecy that science will recoil in horror back into the tragic myth, which he equates with Indian Brahmanic myth in section 18. It initially killed when the guiding thread of causality, right? That's a great parallel, inevitably reaches its boundary in the deepest abysses and the impenetrable darkness at the peripheral limit points of space and time. So the birth of tragedy is Nietzsche's response to Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation. And the world as will and representation is Schopenhauer's synthesis of Immanuel Kant's theory about the a priori categories of thought, space, time, and causality, with Plato's theory of absolute ideas, especially the cave allegory, which Schopenhauer embraces, and Shankara's ninth century Advaita school of Vedanta, non-dual, monistic, atheistic. So what Schopenhauer does is he takes Plato's theory, but he lops off the idea of the good and he replaces it with his theory of the will, which is his very pessimistic interpretation of Brahman. So Shankara is representing Vedanta philosophy, but in an atheistic, monistic, non-dual way. So the two basic parameters of Vedanta philosophy are Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the impersonal ocean of precognitive bliss and potential for all individual form outside of space and time. Shankara says Atman's just an illusion of space, time, and causality, Maya, the veil of Maya, and that it should dissolve like a doll made of salt back into the ocean of Brahman. What Chaitanya, after Shankara, did was he synthesized Shankara's non-dualism with Madhava's dualism, and he says the soul is inconceivably simultaneously one with everything, Brahman, and different, separate as Atman, and we're also one with the supreme Atman, God, and different. God is us, so we're one with God, but none of us is God. God is me and God is you and God understands what I'm experiencing and what you're experiencing, but I only know what I'm experiencing and you only know what you're experiencing. So there's these two ways we're one with and different than God. And Chaitanya said the best way in this sinful age of Kali Yuga to have self-realization is to chant the names of God congregationally, dancing and singing in the streets. And that is what Nietzsche says we need to bring back in The Birth of Tragedy, this tragic culture of congregational song and dance for the flute-playing God in a spirit of devotional service. He emphasizes the devotional service attitude, especially in section 8. But the scientific Socratic era began with the Republic, with the mathematical curriculum for the philosopher king based on the cave allegory. And Nietzsche said, when the thread of causality, the idea of cause and effect, it's only applicable to the realm of space and time, but space and time are not realities outside of our mind. They are the lenses of cognition through which our bodily sense perceptions are observed. Space, you can't see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, or hear it, or time, or causal links, cause and effect. We see discrete sense impressions, and then our mind filters them through these lenses of cognition, which the principle of sufficient reason is what Schopenhauer continuously calls it, because it enables us then to see order and laws applying to the world of material forms that exist, but they're always changing. It's this continuously changing, almost It's a reflection of the permanent world of the absolute forms. And the intermediary between the eternal absolute ideas and the ever-changing material forms they project is the realm of mathematics. So this is an important part of the cave allegory. So what Nietzsche said is when science inevitably reaches the limits of space and time, then it will return to the source of being, the will. But the source of being wants to be experienced in a personal, devotional relationship with its parts and parcels. And that's what Nietzsche did in The Birth of Tragedy. He rejected explicitly Schopenhauer's renunciation of the will in favor of renouncing your subjective will by realizing you are the medium through which the universal will is expressing itself, because it has a desire to escape from the internal contradictions bursting within it by creating myth. And that the will relates to the devotees through the mythical form of the god, and that music is the direct copy of the underlying will. The Apollonian arts, like sculpture and painting, they imitate the forms of space, time, and causality. Plato equates that with the god Apollo. But music is a direct copy of the Dionysian will, the dynamic art, the formless art of music, and it activates the absolute ideas embedded in the will so that the god becomes the archetype of the god, and it is illuminated and expanded infinitely in the audience's mind. It's the language that Nietzsche uses. So everything keeps going in big circles, but what do you have to say about that little summary, especially with this whole idea here?
Yeah. Yeah. And then we've got the kind of fascinating parallel. It's like it's on one side we have Nietzsche's references to his kind of really uh really deep perspective on the movement of humanity through sciences into, through tragedy into the rational mind and back to the Dionysian. And then there's this parallel between the Bacchae and Republic, which is a kind of a fascinating uh, reflection of that. It's I don't know, I just find it fascinating that it's almost like it's almost like the Republic through this lens, it could be seen like the Republic is a prescription for the ideal city and the ideal republic until it's not. Until the course of science, until science has run its course, and then and then the undercurrent of it can be revealed that it has like a deeper prescription, which is what I imagine you're saying here. That's my interpretation of what you're saying.
Yeah, well, the in the Republic, the first ideal, so Socrates gets arrested, and then they bring him back to the palatial home of Polemarchus's elderly father, Cephalus. And there's parallels with the Bacchae and Cadmus with that. I'm not going to confuse it by bringing all that into there. But then Thrasymachus is there, the sophist, and he attacks Socrates. They start talking about what is justice. Thrasymachus says justice is the advantage of the stronger. So Socrates, you give your definition. Well, I'm not qualified. I knew it. Hercules, that's his exclamation. You're always being ironic. You never give your own answer. And then he makes Thrasymachus blush because he questions his theory that justice is the advantage of the stronger. Might makes right. So then Socrates says, we want to find justice. How about this? It's hard to see justice in the individual soul. Let's make the ideally just city. And then the pattern of the city, of which is a collection of psyches, will show us the pattern of the individual psyche. All right, let's do it. The first ideal city he makes is this kind of Amish, simple agrarian society. And it culminates culturally with feasts out in the open on reeds, where it's a vegetarian feast, and they wear wreaths on their heads, sip wine with their children. They don't let the children drink wine, but they sing of the gods. It's very Orphic, the Orphic mystery religion. Glaucon says, oh, that's a city fit for pigs. We need some more luxuries. So then Socrates says, okay, we'll make a feverish city. Why not? And in the process of making the feverish city as just as possible, he makes this elite group of rulers, the men and women guardians, who exercise naked together like hunting dogs out in the open. And they have incestuous sex sometimes because of the noble lie, which prevents them from knowing who their parents or siblings or offspring are. There's a parallel because that's what King Pentheus thought. They keep referring to the women of Thebes out on Mount Cithaeron as hunting dogs, and he thinks they're having a naked orgy. These are all parallels. So he's making this crazy city where the leading elite is this communistic philosophical elite. They don't have any private property. They don't even know who's related by blood to anybody else. And they study philosophy all the time. And they study the mathematics of the material world, which is a reflection of the absolute ideas from which the material world is projected. It culminates with a vision of the idea of the good. That's the cave allegory. What I'm saying is the underlying plot parallel with the Bacchae, it's Plato saying that first just city is just. You sing of the gods, Dionysus, wine and ivy on the head, that's a Dionysian image. So if you combine the surface and the subtext, and I believe this, it's like the surface is like the conscious mind, the subtext of the Bacchae is like the collective unconscious pastime of the god, the archetypes. The archetypes invisibly structure the surface. I believe it's a literary model of the cave allegory. The surface is being secretly structured by the inverted meaning of the underlying Bacchae. But the practical implication is if you want to open the idea of the good, the eye of the soul to the idea of the good, congregational song and dance for the flute playing God is the way to do it. And that's what Nietzsche is saying in The Birth of Tragedy. And I believe he knew that the Republic was based on the Bacchae. And that is what Srila Prabhupada, who's representing Chaitanya's 16th century Gaudiya Vaishnava school of Vedanta, says. In this age, the only way to have self-realization is chanting God's names in the streets. And if you don't, any name will do from any religion, but he recommended the Krishna, Hare Krishna mantra. And that is what Nietzsche was saying in a riddled way. It will return from India when science reaches its limits of space and time. So I'll throw it back to you.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So why don't we let's look at transits. Before we look at transits, do you want to say anything about the structure of society, the implications, or do you want to save that for people that read the paper?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Let's go to what, like you said, um, and then we'll talk about that. So the structure of the caste system, which is a very controversial point, but when we get to these archetypes, we'll see how important it is to talk about it. So let's get down to archetypes. So this is going to be, when this is released, this is what's happening today. We're recording this the day before. Saturn, Neptune, conjunct 0 point Aries. I am saying everything that we've been talking about is reflected in these archetypes. And why don't you take it away from there?
Yeah, there's definitely that these particular two archetypes are reflected in
I
the
know now,
sense
now,
that
Jamie, I know there's a big all kinds of archetypes,
uh
Uranus, Neptune, and everything else, but I know
yeah.
you've got time constraints. But
Yeah. There's I mean all the archetypes are at play, but yeah, those particular two, that's Saturn and Neptune there. So Saturn has to do with structure and Neptune has to do with the ideal, but also the dream and the illusion. Neptune's associated with infinite planes that are transcend dimensionality, like when we dream, it's a Neptunian plane because we can do anything. We're not limited by physics, or when we're in our imagination or in fantasy, or a spiritual plane that is not limited by dimensionality, time, and space. And so it's associated with the ideal, like the way a dream, like we have dreams and hopes and the ideal, but it's also associated with illusions, like when we dream or when we imagine something and we come back to reality, it could be like a mirage, it's not actually real. So there's an illusion there, there's a dream there, there's an ideal association. And then Saturn's associated with structures. Like time and space, for instance, and mortality. There's kind of like limitations, structures, limitations on human life. We don't live forever. There's limitations that create physical reality, like time and space. All these things are structures. And in this particular example, there's reflected here. There's the archetypal combination. These two archetypes combining together gets refracted down in many kind of examples of what you've been talking about. One being that there's that the Republic is very much about a structure for an ideal city. It's about how you would structure how you structure governments and how you structure kind of like the ideal human society and the ideal human psyche. Um, and there's a highly spiritual bent, which is kind of Neptunian. There's a lot of this sense of renunciation, uh, this sense of kind of like for the spiritual good, for the idea of the good, the spiritual ultimate transcendence. There's also the sense of kind of there's a renunciatory aspect there of like not being as attached to the physical world and kind of like leading a spiritual life. Um, I think there may also be something here that you're talking about, which is that there's also in the creation of the ideal, there's also kind of an illusion there. Um, and there's another reality. There's the Saturnian, Saturn associated with reality. There's another, there's a kind of a reality that there's an illusion there because it's actually I guess you could say like there's this it's some type of there's a subtext there or there's like an overarching text which has an illusory quality to it that's not actually the real full reality of what the narrative is or what's trying to be described in the Republic. So that's a couple ways I see it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then I guess in your personal life, uh, there's also Neptune and is also associated with spirituality and philosophy in the sense of like the love of spirituality or the spiritual pursuit of philosophy. And Saturn is associated with making things concrete, bringing your kind of spiritual uh, revelations into a concrete form, giving them structure by publishing these papers and turning it into a book and giving this, talking together and giving it structure. And then there's also an aspect to it of like Saturn is associated with space and time, time being one of the structural elements of reality. And so this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune is on the timeline of life is a kind of like a coming to fruition of your spiritual philosophical pursuit in your life um, from the last conjunction of Saturn Neptune that you were talking about. It's like 36 years ago. So there's kind of like there's inflections in the work of the Republic and what you're talking about with the Bacche and Nietzsche. And then there's also personal reflections in your life, and kind of like your maturation process as a philosopher. Do you see other, do those resonate, make sense? And do you see other inflections of the combination?
Well, totally. And I'll go to my personal
Yeah.
chart, which I'll overlap with this one, for the ending there. But just to comment on the things that you were saying. So yeah, structure, Saturn, structure, gravitas, taskmaster, drill sergeant, archetype. Neptune, illusion, spirituality, but also deception, intoxication, escapism. Those archetypes, and this 0 point Aries. Now, I'm not so, as you know from reading Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche, he doesn't focus so much on the zodiac signs because of disputes
What?
about
I could give a
how to,
little synopsis on that. Like 0 point Aries is the beginning of the zodiac. In the in
right.
the
Yeah,
in
why
the
don't
in
you
the
talk about
tropical zodiac, that's the beginning. That's the start. So 0 point Aries is the start of the whole zodiac, and then it goes around through the 12 signs and comes back. And in the northern hemisphere, that's the start of spring, right? That's the beginning. You say like the beginning. And oftentimes, some cultures have that as the new year. So, anyways, that's like a 0 point Aries. Uh,
Right. That from articles I've been reading online, some of them were pretty good. They talk about the Great Reset and how this is historically important. So rare to have this happen at this particular
yeah, degree, right?
degree. So that's why I kind of thought, well, this is a good
It's
day to launch this
it's a
project.
good, it's definitely an emphasis on beginnings and starts for sure.
All right. And the structuring. So the big thing I see here is the structuring of the illusion. And that is a major theme in the Republic. The surface of the Republic is on one hand, it's very Saturnian because it's a very rigorous ascetic lifestyle for these guardians and a harsh physical education to become warriors, and also even harsher philosophical education, culminating with the mathematical study of nature
Mm,
and the ascending of the dimensions from linear arithmetic to two-dimensional geometry, three-dimensional solid geometry, and then the study of time as the periodic movement of three-dimensional solids, so music and astronomy.
mm,
And there are allusions to astrology in the myth of so says one scholar who I quote in my book, Psyche and Singularity, Jungian Psychology and Holographic String Theory. So the archetypes of the collective unconscious, on the other hand, to flip it, are the undergirding hidden aspect of the Republic, and the surface is the illusion.
right.
And they rotate into each other. The structuring archetype of the god is invisibly underneath the surface of the
Yeah,
Republic.
right. Yeah, like that modeling, that like Republic modeling the Bacchae, that's like a Saturnian thing, right? It's like there's the structure and the rhythm and the pacing and like structuring the Republic on top of the Bacchae. That's very Saturnian.
Yeah, but it's all about the invisible structuring
Yeah,
principle,
right, right.
which is Neptunian.
Yeah,
The
right.
spiritual, eternal, and space, time, and causality are the ultimate veil of Maya, illusion. That's Neptunian.
Right,
And the
right.
underlying, well, what's underlying space, time, and causality? That's for Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, it's the will, which
Mm,
is their translation of Brahman.
mm,
In the union of Atman and Brahman, the supreme Brahman, the supreme Atman is the God. In the
mm.
Vedanta philosophy, that's Krishna. And in the Republic, Plato's using Dionysus. And I'm saying Nietzsche thought Plato was using the Bacchae as an allusion to Krishna and the gopis, the cowherd girls of Vrindavan. So Dionysus comes, in Nietzsche's opinion, from India to Greece with his Asian Indian Bacchae, his dancing and singing chorus of devotees who are women.
Wow, yeah.
And he says the Dionysian myth is an Indian Brahmanic thing.
Wow.
What Indian Brahmanic god with all those qualities plays the flute and dances with adoring women who are his topmost devotees? There's only one, and that's Krishna.
Right.
And the stories of the gopis and Krishna is the crown jewel of the Bhagavat Purana, also called Srimad Bhagavatam. And that is what I believe Nietzsche believed Plato based the Republic on. He thought that the Bacchae was an allusion to the Bhagavat Purana story of Krishna and the gopis.
Mm,
That's my theory, that Nietzsche believed that. I believe that. But it's going to be hard for some people to believe because the philologists of the 19th century were saying, no, the Bhagavad Purana is not really that old. It's much earlier. Some say maybe a few centuries before Christ. Some say up to 1,000 years after. I believe Nietzsche believed it was 5,000 years ago. Written by Vyasa, the great sage who transcribed the Vedas and then wrote the Mahabharata. The Bhagavad Gita is one chapter in the Mahabharata. And then the Puranas, including the Bhagavad Purana. That's the standard tradition that the philologists were saying, yeah, but that's not true.
mm.
And that's a big debate. It's part of the paper. It's going to be part of the next parts of this three-part series. But yeah, the Saturn-Neptune structuring of illusions, major theme in
Yeah,
both books.
right.
Because if Nietzsche knew what Plato was doing, then his book is also an illusion. And it inverts the surface meaning of The Birth of Tragedy, which I believe it was his intention. And that he knew, and Nietzsche says, we're talking about the Dionysus of the mysteries. Here's another important point. In the Phaedo, the last dialogue, not the last dialogue, but the dialogue of Socrates' last life, where he got sentenced to death.
Yeah.
He said, he's all jovial, and they're like, well, how come you can have such high spirits? You're about to die. Everyone else is, we're miserable. We're going to miss you. And he says, well, I have faith in what the riddling language of our mysteries told us. And that's those who are initiated live with the gods, whereas those who are not initiated wallow in the mire. And the saying is that the thyrsus bearers are many, but the Bacchae are few. The thyrsus is a fennel stalk with a pine cone and ivy on it. It's the emblem of the religious emblem the Bacchae carry, and Dionysus. It's this magic wand kind of a thing. And then Socrates explains, and the Bacchae are, in my view, those who have practiced philosophy properly. So throughout my whole life, unstintingly, eagerly, in every way, I've done everything I have in my power to become one of them.
Mm.
So Socrates says, the only thing I've done in my life is I'm trying to become one of the Bacchae.
Mm.
So Plato has Socrates say that on the last day of his life, the riddling language of the mysteries, and it makes it's a great motive for why would you secretly structure the Republic on the Bacchae
Wow.
using a riddling language, and that's one of the explanations for why. So yeah, that one part of the Phaedo really sheds a light on why this is a plausible theory. I believe Nietzsche totally saw it. He refers to the Phaedo and the dying Socrates, and he says Socrates attacked Dionysian tragic culture, and he points to the Bacchae as this great tragic play that Euripides recanted his Socratic attack on Dionysus with. But he never mentions once that in the Phaedo, Socrates says, I spent my whole life unstintingly, eagerly trying in every way to become one of the Bacchae. How do you not mention that? It's the key central point of your whole thing.
Mm.
So it's intentional. One of the things Nietzsche says is, I admire Socrates for everything he said and did not say. And that's how you read these esoteric writings. One of the ways is, what conspicuously obvious thing you should have said did you not say? And that's a way to underline it even more.
Mm.
And recall, in attempt at a self-criticism, the preface Nietzsche added to The Birth of Tragedy, he said, it's beriddled. It's about my still unknown God. And the quote, unknown God, is from St. Paul, where he was in Athens and he told the Athenians, I worship the God that you worship on an altar inscribed with the phrase, to the unknown God. So Nietzsche, the son of a Lutheran pastor, who entered college thinking he was going to become a Lutheran pastor, he knew where that quote is from. So that's the connection with Christ and Krishna. There's all kinds of Krishna, Buddha, Christ connections here. But you know what? I want to go now. So here's my birth chart. So here is Saturn-Neptune conjunct 0 point Aries, February 2026. The Great Reset. Now here's April 13, 1971, my birthday. And what I really want to focus on here is, there it is, 0 point Aries. The right now, I've been saying medium coeli, and it's probably some kind of Italian medium cele, but midheaven, 0 point Aries.
Yeah.
I got it as 0.21
Yeah, the
Aries.
midheaven in your chart, that's like the high noon point in on the day that you were born, top of the sky.
Right. Um, and for philosophy, I know Richard Tarnas says this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, that's a proclivity for philosophy, which I have.
Okay. Yes.
So I just point out, but this is really what I want to focus on. Oh yeah, and opposite Pluto,
Mm.
which is the god of death and resurrection. Dionysus, Tarnas says, is the emblem of that. It would also be Krishna, but Kali,
Oh yeah.
the rejected god who returns, and he's super powerful, the most powerful archetype. Whatever touches it lends this titanic power to of death and resurrection.
Hmm.
So here is my here is the outer sphere. Here is where the planets are today, and the inner sphere is where they were when I was born. But you see, it's conjunct 0 point Aries on my midheaven,
Yeah,
opposite
man. Yeah.
opposite Pluto.
Yeah. Yeah, it's right there. It's right
It's
on the
right there.
midheaven.
And It started in 1989 when I started. Here's Saturn-Neptune conjunction, November 1989. It happened three times, but here they are, Saturn and Neptune conjunct. And that's when I started studying philosophy and Plato in particular in that first fall semester at Boston College.
Wow.
I discovered the, so I'll just leave that there. I discovered the parallel between the Republic and the Bacchae in 2006 in the summer when I was working as a campus cop at Georgetown University and getting a Master's of Liberal Studies degree. I took a class in Greek tragedy and we read the Bacchae. And I was like, what the? I started noticing the parallels. So I just checked and I was like, well, if this is right, then he would have been threatened with rearrest in the middle. Sure enough, he was. And then I'm like, arrested in the beginning, threat with rearrest in the middle, the two sons and two thieves, the cave out, it all started lining up. And then the ending is you have to infer the historical reality as the implied conclusion of the Republic is Polemarchus's murder. That completes the parallel. So that was Saturn. Here, I'm just going to go down there. Yeah, August 31st, 2006. Where is Saturn and Neptune? Oh, there's Neptune, there's Saturn. See, exact opposite.
Yeah.
So for Richard Tarnas, these astrological alignments develop their themes diachronically. So there's a conjunction, then there's a square, then there's an opposition, then there's another square, 90-degree angle with Earth in the center. So they started out conjunct. Now here's where they're opposite each other. This is where I discovered earlier that summer the parallels between the Republic and the Bacchae. And then in September of that year, as a campus cop, I got involved in a big fight that broke out. And I got hit in the head with a stick or something. My skull was showing, blood is everywhere. It was a mob fight. It's crazy. And in my mind, I thought, this has something to do with me discovering this parallel between the Republic and the Bacchae with Pentheus getting ripped to shreds at the end. It's kind of like, okay, you've cracked the code of the mysteries here, and now you're wanting to write your thesis about it, which I did. Was a response to Al Gore's book, Earth in the Balance, where he blames Plato for the ecological collapse. And I was like, yeah, but there's a secret meaning. So it's just this diachronic unfolding. And now the next full conjunction is here, and I'm releasing this paper, which is it's the culmination of everything I've been working on since the original Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
So
Saturn's like associated with Saturn's the archetype that's associated with in the human psyche with certainty and with consistency. And as it shows up and then in the outer world of dimensionality, it's like, it's the realities that we're certain of, like that there's time, there's space. Um, and in the transits, it has this tendency to mark this kind of um, this consistency of theme, things like it does a full cycle, it conjoins with a planet, does a full cycle of probably like over 30 years, depending on which planet. And we can see our those themes in our life go through their maturation, and and then we can see what with this kind of like very consistent developmental pattern. That's just fascinating. So it's so cool to see, like you came into this encounter with philosophy, particularly these themes in philosophy, when they were conjoined, the next piece comes when they're in opposition. They reconjoin again. You kind of have all the pieces together now in one uh, series of papers. It's fascinating.
I want to do one more alignment now that we've basically covered Saturn and Neptune, and I think you
Mhm.
did a great job. Thank you for that, Jamie.
Oh yeah.
Wonderful astrologer. If you want to get your charts read, Jamie's your man. So here is the Jupiter Uranus conjunction at 0 point Aries, which I haven't seen anyone else connect to this Neptune Saturn conjunction. Okay, June 8th, 2010. Now I'm living out in Oakland with you,
Hmm.
not in your house, but in Oakland. I'm going to school in San Francisco, California Institute of Integral Studies. with the PCC program, Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness, founded by Richard Tarnas, author of Passion of the Western Mind, great summary of history of Western philosophy, and Cosmos and Psyche, which is studying the history of Western philosophy through the astrological lens that we've been talking about. Fascinating. When I read that, that's when I got into astrology. I'm out there and I'm studying this, and this is where I discovered on the 4th of July, 2010, I'm watching Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. I'm working on a paper, I think, for Sean Kelly, who is a professor out at CIIS. And in the background is Leonard Susskind describing the black hole war with Stephen Hawking about the principle of information conservation inside black holes. And how the information, it's destroyed from one perspective if you follow it past the event horizon. From outside, it gets smeared out around the event horizon and released with the Hawking radiation. The universe is an inside-out black hole. The past, present, and future are recorded at the horizon of the cosmos, and they project in to make this holographic movie. I was like, what? Because I was studying Carl Jung with Sean Kelly, and he had a near-death experience in 1944 where he said the exact same thing. It seemed to me as if the past, present, and future were out at the horizon of the cosmos, and each of us is imprisoned in our own little box of illusion, tethered to the horizon of the cosmos by a thread. Carl Jung. That became my dissertation, but this is the archetype that was in effect. Jupiter-Neptune conjunct 0 point.
Jupiter-Uranus.
I mean, Jupiter-Uranus conjunct at that 0 point, which is my midheaven.
Yeah.
But it seems, like divine intelligence. What are the odds that these two major alignments are going to both happen at that most important point?
Yeah, right. That's so fascinating. And
Yeah.
for you, it's interesting because so Uranus is the archetype of the rebel archetype, and also the innovation archetype, the breakthrough, the archetype of the breakthrough, the leap, the breakthrough, the rebellion, the innovation. Jupiter is that which expands what the other archetypes it comes upon. And for you, this was adding to your what was otherwise a really kind of retrospective investigation of like historically in terms of like the foundations of philosophy, like Plato, Socrates, Nietzsche. But this brings in the the cutting edge of scientific exploration. It's very Uranian, it's like the edge of of human innovation. And it's also kind of a breakthrough combo. It's right there on your midheaven. Those are some of the things that I noticed there.
Yeah, it was big. I mean, I was like, wow, this is crazy, the way this works out. And then I read Jung's equation, psyche equals highest intensity in the smallest space. He's equating psychic energy with mass and E equals mc squared, energy equals mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. And he says, what about psychic energy? It should be equivalent to some mass. And he goes, maybe it's because the mass is infinitely intense in the point of zero volume. That's the definition of a gravitational singularity.
Wow.
So you put psyche equals singularity, and Rick Tarnas pointed out, I study the history of the diachronic discoveries of the gravitational singularity. It embodies the Saturn-Pluto hard alignment archetypes.
Hmm.
Saturn, gravity, darkness, inward contraction, Pluto, death and resurrection, titanic power. It's the archetype of that alignment, the singularity. And the psyche is the singularity. And the collective unconscious is the cosmic horizon. This is this mandala image of the self. The central point is the conscious ego. The outer sphere is the collective unconscious. They rotate into each other. It's one. It is the archetype of the one, the mandala image of the archetype of the self, the one that Carl Jung talked about.
Yeah, that was what he kind of like emphasized, right? The mandala.
Yeah, he says this was the greatest discovery of my life, that the image of the ultimate archetype of the self, which is equivalent to the idea of the good, it compensates an ego when it's pulled between opposing demands with images of mandalas. It leads it towards wholeness through the union of opposites through mandalas. The astrology horoscope is a perfect mandala,
Yeah, right.
with Earth at the center, which represents us, and all the planets at the outermost sphere. I talk about that in Psyche and Singularity.
Yeah, that's great because yeah, the archetypes as witnessed in outer space, or you could say the planets as witnessed as archetypes, the planets witnessed in outer space as representations of the archetypes reflect the themes in the on the stage of our life. And also like the intrapsychic themes, what's going on within us, and also the events that are going on the stage of our life, just like that way that you described, or that Brian Greene used that movie metaphor. Um,
Yeah, holographic
so
movie.
yeah, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, so it's got all these archetypal elements, and I think we've covered everything. But this is the alignment that is being embodied, I'm saying, in many ways. And one of them is the paper that I'm releasing, A Horizon Defined by Myths. Let me put that back up here.
So maybe we can do a part two when you have the next paper out.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean,
So
that's,
I encourage everybody to read this paper.
thank you, Jamie. And all 13 people who watch this video, please, you also, please read my paper.
Yeah,
And
13,000.
yeah, 13,000. You know what? Let me just give a shout out also to my man Beto Paredes, Eddie Paredes. He just put out his book, The School of Our Divine Infinite Being, the Central Doctrine, where he explains tarot and astrology and all these themes. He gets way into the psychical singularity equation. He helped me put up a website where I go over my class, Immortality and the Unreality of Death.
Oh, I've taken
Here's
that class. It's fascinating. It's great.
yeah,
Great
here's
class.
Journey through Philosophy, Psychology, and that's Psyche and Singularities. This is the website. So I'll put links to that in the description for this. So any other concluding words, Jamie? Thanks a lot, by the way.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's fascinating. This is all your discovery, so I really appreciate being invited on board to discuss them. It's fascinating. I look forward to part two,
All right. Well, then let's
and can't
give
wait
it
to
a
read the
wrap.
book. I've read your first book. Amazing. Can't read to read the second.
All right. All right. Well, I know you got a busy schedule, so until part two, well, I'll
All
be
right.
talking to you before then.
All right.
All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.